Okay, so as promised, we're back with episode 7 of the Insight series, again with Mike Law. This one is going to be quite interesting. So we're focusing on general high-level motorsport, what vehicle dynamicists would do if there was no regulations. Yeah, just using some creativity, what would the approaches be? Um, I guess starting with the big five, which is what we covered in our first video, the 5 key factors of performance in race cars. Let's start by going through each of those and explaining um, what what the key areas for innovation or creativity might do or might be. So over to you, Mike. Let's start with downforce.
Yeah, sure. So uh, obviously, when we're talking about uh, removing regulations from the class to make things to allow the cars to get quicker, I think we obviously need to focus on the big five aspects that we've already introduced kind of earlier in the series, as you say, and aerodynamics and downforce is kind of quite close to the top of the list on this one. Obviously, we want to maximize downforce around the lap whilst minimizing drag, and you could use various kind of active devices to do that in order to kind of achieve both. So, be able to run your car in a state of maximum downforce through all your grip limited sections, and then allow that to drop away in your on the straights where you're limited by the engine power into a kind of low drag configuration. And we've seen various iterations of active aerodynamics through the years, through active wings and active aerodynamic surfaces that are, I suppose, in your ideal case, controlled through the ECU rather than through any kind of manual control that the driver might need to kind of put in. But then we've also seen things like active suspension as a way of modifying the, the aerodynamic flow field around the car, pulling out downforce, building up as much downforce as you can around those grip limited areas to exploit the every every newton of grip that you have in the tires up until and you should be able to add as much downforce as you can before you burst the tires through the very weight of the load.
Yeah, yeah. I find myself conflicted with that because I kind of think there should be at least one championship where people should be able to experiment with things like that.
I think, yeah, I think the difficulty is if you if you were to allow that, you'd probably increase the corner speed so much and reduce the length of the braking zones that you'd see no overtaking essentially. And I think the racing suffers a lot uh, as you add performance like that. The ability of cars to follow one another is another reason why we don't tend to see those that kind of regulation, albeit maybe your so the I think your the best areas to experiment with things like this are maybe your kind of time attack, time trial type um, series. Maybe something like Pikes Peak is a good vehicle for some of these crazier ideas.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Okay, so tires, yeah, different things you could do there. Um, Four-wheel drive would obviously be a big one. Yeah, and more controlling the conditions of the tire. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
So obviously you'd want the sort of lightest, grippiest uh, tires that you can get hold of for your car in this fake series, and then obviously you have to put those in a condition that extracts the maximum grip at any one particular time. So four-wheel drive is an excellent way of doing that, provided you've restricted yourself to only having four wheels on your car. The and four-wheel steer is another good example that you might try and get in there as well. So obviously in a low speed corner, you you can gain a lot of kind of car balance through steering the rear wheels alongside the front axle as well. And then also, kind of as you say, controlling the condition of the tire first of all in terms of its temperature and pressure. You know, whether there's anything you could do to actively cool the tires uh, as you're driving around, and you know you're likely to need it because of all the downforce that that you've already put on, uh, and and then, but as well, the you know the attitudes in terms of kind of cambers and toes, whether you can put the tire at exactly the right condition for maximum grip at every point you're grip limited.
Mm. Yeah. So I guess just brainstorming of the different ways you could control the temperature. You could have, um, you could like something like a liquid nitrogen jet onto the tread layer, or even internally, you could have some way of releasing, um, something with a would it be a high or a low heat capacity? Something that's really going to take a lot of heat out of the tire and move it to somewhere else.
Yeah, I think you're right. Some kind of active cooling around the tire, probably around both the surface and the internals, as you say, is 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 what you're going to get there. But I'm sure it's not something that's been thought about too much, simply because there's no series in the world that's gonna allow it.
Yeah, yeah. Although the closest thing I can think of is truck racing, where they allow you to spray the brake disc with
Yes.
water, and that will obviously through evaporation or just being flung out will come into contact with the rim, which will then help to increase the conduction of heat out of the tire. So just on four wheel steer, so ultimately you're not going to increase the grip that a tire can generate by having a four wheel steer system. So what your yeah, what exactly is it that we'll be doing there? So is changing the force vectors?
So I think what you need is you need to present the tire to the road using the slip angles that will generate maximum lateral force on all of your tires. Uh, we talked a little bit about Ackerman in one episode, and you on the and it kind of it's kind of related to that, but on a on a whole car scale. So you know, angling the tires relative to the body such that they're generating maximum lateral force at every point around the corner is going to be the way to get the most out of each tires in a way that we aren't able to do on a particularly on a car with no steer on the rear axle anyway. Uh, it's definitely it's definitely not something that it's definitely a system that's going to require a great deal of finessing and tuning, because there's definitely things that you can do to make the car handling a lot worse with those four wheel steer. But I'm assuming that in our fictional series, there's going to be plenty of cash to spend on
Yeah,
developing each of these individual elements.
yeah. So that effect is you can somewhat replicate with, or passively at least with roll steer, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, not as targeted as you would be able to do with an active system, but yeah, that is something you can do with roll, and also compliance, right? Whether you're introducing an understeer or oversteer effect with your compliance.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose the what you have with your roll steer example is there are some cases where you're going to want the tires towing in on the rear axle, so towing into the corner, so steering into the corner, so particularly when your car's got a lot of say high speed oversteer, uh, you're going to benefit from that direction. But then in a very low speed corner, all that's going to do is just add huge amounts of understeer and make it more difficult uh, to get around a very low speed corner. So the benefits of being able to do it actively are you can cover both of those scenarios in one.
Yep. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So weight. Um, yeah. What can we do around weight? You can take it out. Make sure it's distributed differently.
So uh, yeah, this one's probably quite interesting because obviously all of the systems we've talked about in terms of active active aerodynamics, four-wheel drive, four-wheel steer, any system of controlling tire temperatures and pressure, they're all going to add weight to the car uh, in a way that um, has to so we have to justify their performance improvement based on the weight that they're going to add, because minimizing weight is a very efficient way of improving the performance of our car. Uh, we could, I think there's easy things that you could take off a uh, current racing car body that might remove weight. So unfortunately for the driver, that might be things like crash structures and safety systems that aren't essential for perfect operation of the car. So you could reduce through reduce weight through means like that. But and if nothing else, because that's going to mean we can add on all some of these extra systems that we're going to need to exploit the tire grip and the aerodynamics as best we can. And I think the other aspects of that, so sort of mass properties, ultra low CG, obviously, and low inertia, probably low moments of inertia. They're going to help us out a little bit as well, and just making sure all of the mass properties of the vehicle are as kind of constrained as they can be.
Yep. Yeah. And so power is one of the other ones. The thing about power is that, it, in an ideal sense, um, you'd always be able to overwhelm the tires at any point of the track.
Yeah, as you say, that just the perfect amount of power is just enough to make you grip limited everywhere, as you say. Uh, but again, with all the downforce we've added, that's that's going to be a difficult task. I haven't sat down and thought about how much power you might need to uh, slip the tires on the rear axle of something like a sports car or a Formula car with a lot of downforce. But I'm sure it's a pretty huge amount. And again, an engine with that much power is probably going to contribute a good deal of weight to the car. Uh, and you've just got to make sure that trade is always giving you better performance.
Yeah, but then also I guess you've got the differential to help you maximize the way in which you're using the power you do have. Um, so yeah, some kind of um, I guess it would be some kind of active differential control would be helpful in that sense, right? Like an electromechanical kind of setup.
Oh, sure, yeah, active differentials and maybe even differentials of your sort of torque steer type are gonna help you in that respect. Uh, you'd imagine something like individual hub or wheel motors on each corner of the car is maybe your best chance of controlling torque around all four corners exactly as you like. Unfortunately for our power unit, being able to manage like that is only going to increase the power we need to mean we're grip limited on all four tires everywhere. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's gonna take a lot of power,
Yeah.
but maybe there's some headroom.
Yeah. Okay. And then so I guess the last one is how can we help the driver? Yeah. What can we do apart from augment them with a some kind of performance improving, hardware?
For the purposes of this discussion, it's probably worth sticking with a human driver rather than some kind of completely robotic system. Maybe your any kind of AI type driver is going to be quite a lot lighter than our human driver, that might help us get over some of the weight requirements. But sticking with the human driver is quite interesting to think about the kind of things you might choose to add to your car to extract the most performance by, let's say, giving the driver with all the information they need to be able to operate the vehicle effectively, around every point in the lap. And that might be things like uh, manipulating the steering weight through active pass, that or power assisted steering, that uh, that kind of tells the driver when they're around the limit. Certainly at the moment, because your peak in tire, how should I call it, steering moment, uh, arrives earlier in terms of slip angle than your peak for lateral force on the tire, then the steering torque is a little bit polluted with that self-aligning torque effect, as opposed to the pure lateral force of the tire. And whether you can tune that in some way to better exploit that characteristic, tell the driver when they're at the limit of tire performance, rather than just when they're at the limit of the maximum sort of self-aligning torque or that sort of thing. You could also imagine cueing them in different ways, like having little lights that flash up as they're approaching braking points. Giving them countdowns for exactly when they'll need to brake for different corners. Uh, Most cars don't have brake boosters. Uh, most racing cars won't have a brake booster to deliver extra brake torque into the system over and above what the driver can achieve with just their legs. So you could imagine a system like that as well, particularly since we've already added a lot of downforce and a lot of tire grip. That should mean you need very high brake pressures to get the kind of stopping power that you need. And I'm sure there's that if we spoke to a driver, they could think of 100 different ways that giving them different information would allow them to drive the car a bit better.
Yeah, active brake biasing would be another good one there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So that covers the main engineering elements of performance. So how about the cornering phases? What could we do? Could we do to improve performance there if we didn't have any regulations?
Yeah, so it's useful, I think, to break down some of the things we've already talked about into different corner phases, and kind of explain what you're likely to be limited by with any kind of current racing car, and what could be possible with complete freedom. So I think we'll leave out a lot of the sort of downforce and tire grip elements to maybe this part, just because we're taking it as read that we're maximizing those things whenever we're grip limited. But maybe we can talk about how you might choose to distribute power uh, uh, and optimizing grip in each of these phases as a way to kind of improve performance. So I think so. I guess the corner typically starts with some straight line braking, and I guess what's interesting here is this is a point of the lap when you actually want to maximize drag. So you want to stop in as short a distance as possible, and drag is an extra component of that. We also will want to, in order to extract the most performance out of the car, we're going to want to minimize the weight transfer that we see from front to rear axle, and that could be done with a very long wheelbase. But I suspect that's gonna hurt us in some of the tighter low speed corners. But certainly having a very low car CG is a mechanism for kind of reducing front to rear axle weight transfer in that phase of the corner. That means we can kind of better exploit uh, the performance of the tires. I suppose what you could imagine some device for shifting ballast around the car, and that's not just limited to this kind of phase. But my expectation is that the weight of the ballast and the system that you use to move it around is going to dominate the effect that this has in a reasonably negative way.
Yeah. Okay. Corner entry then. The next phase of cornering. Um, some of the problems there with trail braking, um, and yeah, the slip angles of the front wheels. So how would we solve those problems?
Yeah, so in this phase, we're going to be either limited by front inside wheel locking, or we're going to be limited by the effect of weight transfer on car stability. That's going to try and spin the car around, and it's going to be a job to kind of balance between those two aspects. So to prevent the front locking, we can talk about ABS. So you should be able to, if you don't have ABS, you should be able to achieve that with a some kind of front differential, being able to uh, force the front inside tire around whilst the outside tire is still moving, as another way of preventing front locking. The other approach you could take is some kind of active Ackerman on the four wheel steering that keeps the lateral force requirement of the front inside tire as low as possible, so that you can achieve kind of greater braking torque with it. And then I think controlling the amount of uh, uh, rear axle slip and therefore the stability that you get is probably just a matter of increasing downforce and tire grip as much as possible, and probably some kind of active four-wheel steer to prevent you from spinning when you're kind of hard on the brakes with a lot of weight transfer, and then steering the front axle to get you into the corner.
So then moving into the mid cornering phase, where you're kind of approaching the apex, you want a nice balanced car, um, and yeah, you're dealing with the highest levels of weight transfer. Um, yeah, what are some things? What are some of your creative ideas on managing that?
Yeah, so I, as I've talked about in some other talks before, any car that's balanced on entry is likely to be understeer limited at mid corner, because of the way of the change you get as a result of weight transfer. We could obviously try uh, reducing the weight transfer with a, a longer wheelbase, as we sort of touched on, but that's likely to make other areas of the lap worse. So again, that's something you're that's going to be a tuning problem rather than just a handle you can turn indefinitely. I think the uh, keeping your weight transfer down through a wide track is quite important here for maximizing the grip on each tire, and then also having enough control in your active suspension to move mechanical balance around between sort of this phase and the entry. So I'd expect as you get closer to mid corner and the front slip starts to build up, uh, using mechanical balance to balance that understeering moment by starting to ask a bit more of the rear axle, and moving balance rearwards in that respect. And using that along with the four wheel steer, any kind of torque vectoring that we've got through the four wheel drive, just to make sure we have the balance that the driver wants through this phase relative to the entry.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So then moving into the exit where the driver's straightening out the wheel, um, the yawing moment's decreasing and they're starting to apply power. Um, so that is, yeah, that's the tires are still in a combined grip environment. So yeah, maximizing the vectors you're getting there with some kind of differentials, torque management, or torque vectoring, I should say.
Yeah, agreed. And then I think this is where the four-wheel drive is gonna help most as well, diverting the all your power to the tires with the most grip, and using that to get you out of the corner as quickly as possible. Uh, it's um, it's an interesting problem because you've still got your weight transfer through the cornering, and obviously any torque that you add at a particular wheel is going to also affect your handling to a greater or lesser extent. So being able to divert more torque to the front axle should reduce any kind of oversteering moment that the you'd normally get just with a rear wheel drive car, and using that to maximize the grip on all of your four tires, and get you onto the straight as quickly as you can.
So there you have it. I think we've got it figured out. If anyone would like to start this championship, we're happy to consult you on your your car platform. But yeah, that was an interesting thought experiment.
Yeah, it's good. Hopefully, it shows how you can derive the kind of systems that you need through kind of first principles. Those big five topics that we talked about earlier. Those are the things that are your kind of first order performance considerations, and you should be able to derive your approach to a relaxation of the rules from starting off from those.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what a car built to this would kind of look like. I'd imagine it would look pretty different in a lot of ways. But yeah, cool. Yeah, so that's been another episode of Vehicle Dynamics Insights. A bit of a fun one this time round. But yeah, I think if you give engineers a blank sheet of paper, you can generally get something. A blank sheet of paper and a blank checkbook, you can get some interesting things out of it. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you again. Nice one.